How the cat became. Cat was a real oddity. The others didn't know what to make of him at all. He lived in a hollow tree in the wood. Every night, when the rest of the creatures were sound asleep, he retired to the depth of his tree. Then such sounds, such screechings, whoolings, wailings, the bats that slept upside down all day long in the hollows of the tree branches awoke with a start and fled with their wings tips stuffed into their ears. It seemed to them that Cat was having the worst nightmares ever, 10 at a time. But no, Cat was turning his violin. If only you could have seen him, curled in the warm, smooth hollow of his tree, gazing up through the hole at the top of the trunk, smiling at the stars, winking at the moon, his violin tucked under his chin. Ah, Cat was a happy one. And all night long he sat there composing his tunes. Now the creatures didn't like this at all. They saw no use in this music. It made no food, it built no nest, it didn't even keep him warm. And the way Cat lounged around all day, sleeping in the sun, was just more than they could stand. Here's a bad example, said Beaver. He never does a stroke of work. What if our children think they can live as idle as he does? It's time, said Whistle, that Cat had a job like everybody else in the world. So the creatures of the wood formed a committee to persuade Cat to take a job. Jay, Magpie, and Parrot went along at dawn and sat in the topmost twigs of Cat's old tree. As soon as Cat poked his head out, they all began together. You have to get a job, get a job, get a job. That was the only beginning of it. All day long, everywhere he went, those birds were at him. Get a job, and try as he would. Cat could not get one wink of sleep. That night he went back to his tree early. He was far too tired to practice on his violin and fell fast asleep in a few minutes. Next morning, when he poked his head out of the tree at first light, the three birds of the committee were there again, loud as ever. Get a job. Cat ducked back down into his tree and began to think. He wasn't going to start grubbling around in the wet woods all day, as they wanted him to. Oh no, he wouldn't have any time to play his violin if he did that. There was only one thing to do, and he did it. He tucked his violin under his arm and suddenly jumped out at the top of the tree and set off through the woods at a run. Behind him, shouting and calling, came Jay, Magpie, and Parrot. Other creatures that were about their daily work in the undergrowth looked up when Cat ran fast. No one had ever seen Cat run before. Cat's up to something, they called to each other. Maybe he's going to get a job at last. Deer, wild boar, bear, ferret, mongoose, porcupine, and a cloud of birds set off after Cat to see where he was going. After a great deal of running, they came to the edge of the forest. There they stopped. As they peered through the leaves, they looked sideways at each other and trembled. Ahead of them, across an open field covered with haycocks, was man's farm. But Cat wasn't afraid. He went straight on over the field and up to man's door. He raised his paw and banged as hard as he could in the middle of the door. Man was so surprised to see Cat that at first he just stood, eyes wide, mouth open. No creature ever dared to come onto his fields, let alone knock at his door. Cat spoke first. I have come for a job, he said. A job? Asked Man, hardly able to believe his ears. Work, said Cat. I want to earn my livings. Man looked him up and down, then saw his long claws. You look as if you would make a fine rat catcher, a man said. Cat was surprised to hear that. He wondered what if it was about him that made him look like a rat catcher. Still, he wasn't going to miss the chance of a job, so he stuck out his chest and said, Been doing it for years. Well then, I have a job for you, said Man. My farm's swarming with rats and mice. They are in my haystacks. They are in my corn sacks and they are all over the pantry. So before Cat knew where he was, he had been signed on as a rat and mouse catcher. His pay was milk, meat, and a place at the fireside. He slept all day and worked all night. At first, he had a terrible time. The rats pulled his tail, the mice nipped his ears. They climbed onto rafters above him and dropped down, thump, onto him in the dark. They teased the life out of him. But Cat was a quick learner. At the end of the week, he could lay out a dozen rats and twice as many mice within half an hour. If he would gone on laying them out all night, there would pretty soon have been none left, and Cat would have been out of a job. So he just got a few each night, in the first 10 minutes or so. Then he retired into the barn and played his violin till morning. This was just the job he had been looking for. Man was delighted with him, and Mrs. Man thought he was beautiful. So she took him into her lap and stroked him for hours on end. What a life, thought Cat. If only those silly creatures in the dripping wet woods could see him now. From Tej Haj's story by the same name.